Which of these stories will you be talking about tomorrow?
Brookfield Properties that they are postponing their cleaning.
This was a big victory. I mean, while the sun was down, we were getting ready to be arrested. The sun broke and the park was ours.
But the streets were not. When Occupy Wall Street goes off script and on to Wall Street, what one reporter described as something like the running of the bulls at Pamplona, with police on motorbikes as the bulls. They then arrested him for knocking over the bike. This is Countdown special coverage of Occupy Wall Street Day 28 with lawyer Yetta Kurland, attorney for the protester run over by the police, with Occupy statement co-author Ryan Hoffman, with witness and punching victim Michael Tracey, and with details on the rolling up of Occupy Denver and the rolling out of Occupy globally, Occupy Milan, Italy. And with Markos Moulitsas on the possibility that the protests have already moved the needle in Washington after the Treasury Secretary talks this morning about new rules for Wall Street.
You've seen very, very dramatic enforcement actions already by the enforcement authorities across the U.S. government, and I'm sure you're going to see more to come.
And with a special reprise of a special comment from 74 days ago on the debt deal and the cuts to the social safety net and the only way to fight back. We must protest this deal and all the goddamn deals to come in the streets. We must arise non-violently but insistently. General strikes, boycotts, protests, sit-ins, all that and more now on a special edition of Countdown.
The people united!
Good evening from New York. This is Friday, October 14th, 389 days until the 2012 presidential election, and this is a special edition of Countdown. This was the day when New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg and Police Commissioner Raymond Kelly managed to snatch violence from the jaws of peaceful protest. Even as the cleaning up and cleaning out of Zuccotti Park was postponed, New York police still managed to clash with the protesters who didn't clear off Wall Street fast enough to their liking, arresting about 15 protesters, punching at least 2, and running one over with a motorbike. This after marchers left the park in 2 streams, one towards City Hall, the other down Wall Street itself, where some of the worst confrontations took place. All that followed this dramatic announcement at about 6:30 this morning.
We received notice from the owners of Zuccotti Park.
We received notice from the owners of Zuccotti Park.
Brookfield Properties that they are postponing their cleaning.
I'm part of this movement. I believe that this movement has brought a voice to millions of people that never was heard. You can call us left wing. I call us people. I call us people who believe in people and that we should have an equal chance the way this country was founded on.
We're all pretty pumped up right now. A bunch of us are walking down to Wall Street.
All week, Occupy Wall Street. All day, all week, Occupy Wall Street.
Move! Guys, move! Move! The street!
in the altercation with the police scooter, which was then parked on his leg, is a National Lawyers Guild legal observer, Ari Douglas, and he remains under arrest tonight. His attorney, Yetta Kurland, who is also part of the Liberty Park working group supporting Occupy Wall Street, will join us later in this news hour with the latest on his condition, on what happened, on her response to a police allegation that he deliberately put his feet under the scooter and was never really trapped, though even that claim would not address the fact that he was apparently hit by the vehicle in the first place. Meanwhile, Mayor Bloomberg said Brookfield Properties had agreed to the postponement of the cleaning only after threats from local officials who the mayor claims told Brookfield they would, quote, make your life more difficult. Bloomberg also saying that while Brookfield wanted to work out an agreement with Occupy Wall Street, a confrontation over Zuccotti Park may have only been postponed.
If they want to take a couple days to try to work something out, they're welcome to do that. I've asked what happens if they cannot, and the answer I got was that then they would want to go ahead and do exactly what they were going to do this morning.
There were more arrests as police clashed with Occupy protests around the country, at least 23 in Denver, Colorado, after protesters there refused to leave Veterans Park across from the state capitol. Governor John Hickenlooper, heretofore considered a progressive, has ordered that park closed until further notice. 10 more arrests in Seattle, where protesters refused to leave Westlake Park, but city officials there say they will allow Occupy protesters to gather near City Hall Plaza. At least one arrest in San Diego. Protesters there had refused to move their tents from a plaza behind City Hall. And in Gainesville, Florida, 4 arrests at Occupy Gainesville, including Ellis McDaniel, Bo Diddley Jr., the son of the legendary rhythm and blues performer, for trespassing, and the place that Bo Diddley Jr. was trespassing in, Bo Diddley Plaza. In Chicago, Occupy marchers were boosted by support from the AFL-CIO, the Service Employee Union, and the Teamsters. No one would have believed that in 1970. And in Detroit, at least 500 protesters gathered at the Spirit of Detroit statue for a planned march to Grand Circus Park. One marcher telling the Detroit Free Press, there's something wrong with the direction of this country, and it's got to stop. I'm going to talk with several eyewitnesses to today's violent events in Lower Manhattan. Ryan Hoffman, co-author of the Occupy Wall Street Declaration, previous guest on this program. Good evening, Ryan.
Good evening, Keith.
And Michael Tracey, a journalist and a contributing writer to The Nation, who was both an eyewitness and a police victim during today's march. Welcome to you, sir.
Hello, Keith.
Ryan, did you expect the confrontation? What was the atmosphere like in the park when the announcement was made that the cleaning had been postponed?
It was electric. I mean, we were all so excited, and we knew that it was sort of time that we express ourselves, and direct action has never really been sort of part of the General Assembly. Part of that process is if you want to go celebrate by marching, you celebrate by marching. If you want to stay and hold the fort, hold the fort. So a group of people decided that they wanted to go march down Broadway, and that's where we started doing that. And what was that?
Which way did you go, and what did you see when you got there?
I went with the first march down on Broadway, and we made a left down at the Bull, and we sort of made a circle up of Pearl, and then came back and joined up with a larger march, who then went again down towards the Bull, and that's where the mopeds first showed up.
Michael, did you see the violence start? Did you see this with the protesters? Was there a confrontation? Did they taunt the police? What was the origin point? Is there any way to be clear on that?
Well, evidently, Keith, the NYPD has determined that its most effective crowd control tactic is to simply send a fleet of motor cops, I call them, or police officers on motorcycles, into crowds of demonstrators who have assembled on streets there in Lower Manhattan near Wall Street. And when you inject law enforcement into a situation in that manner, it's not surprising that you're going to come out with confrontations, tensions escalated, and ultimately violence.
Yeah, when it looks like an episode of Rollerball, it usually it winds up looking like an episode of Rollerball. What happened to you? Were you threatened with arrest, or what was the? Walk me through what happened to you personally.
Sure. Well, I was in the plaza when the announcement was made that, contrary to previous insinuations, the park would not be evicted by the authorities. So there was a very palatable sense of elation there. Excitement percolating throughout the crowd. So it wasn't surprising to me when a breakaway march went south down Broadway. So I trailed along to document what happened, and the next thing I know, the entire thing descended into pandemonium. Again, you had those cops on motorcycles zooming down the street. I witnessed a photographer who was kneeling on the ground taking a photo directly in front of me just get pummeled by a police officer. I witnessed a police officer, actually a white-shirted officer, so a higher-ranking officer, a lieutenant, deputy inspector, etc., just outright clock a guy in the face, seemingly without provocation. And I have to tell you,
we had the tape of that. That's your tape, right?
That is my tape.
The green video, as it were.
Yeah, there's a video right now on Reason.com, Reason Magazine. I contributed a video report. And I have to tell you, Keith, it was disturbing to witness, because especially in a place like New York City, where we have such a rich history of political dissent, not only being tolerated, but embraced in public fora, to have law enforcement clamp down like the way that they have, it's troubling, and I think forebodes poorly for the nation.
Ryan, do you have any idea, all told, how many people were at Wall Street or were theoretically in violation of whatever the cops wanted them to do? How big a crowd it was by that point?
When we met up with the larger march, it was about 500 people.
Okay, so there could have, the claim that it could have been blocking traffic and all this, was there any validity to that?
There's some validity to it. I mean, but that doesn't mean we deserve to get run over with mopeds. And I saw a police officer, while he was riding a moped, reach over his shield and give a protester a right cross. It was like something out of a Jason Statham movie. It was really intense. And to the NYPD's credit, they actually pulled that officer off of his moped. And I don't know if he's awaiting disciplinary action or not, but I know that he was pulled off.
Give me your assessment on that. And we always talk about this: the ratio of aggressive officers, aggressive policemen, to use the generic term for officers, and the blue shirt guys. The ratio of the aggressive ones to the not physically aggressive ones, was it the usual mix, or was there more or less?
I'd say it's always hard to tell, because you have a few certain individuals who decide to go above and beyond their call to inflict violence on protesters, and then you have individual police officers that I've had conversations with that are just there to do their job, and don't want any confrontation, and those are the people that want to let us have our voices heard. And so it's hard to demonize the entire police force, but then you also have to take a look at their training. Over the past 10 years,
every situation is a fatal threat.
They've become so militarized that they don't know how to deal with peaceful protesters anymore, and I think that's a shame.
Michael, all things considered, given what Ryan just mentioned about what has happened to a police force, and it's not just here, but it is largely here. It's absolutely true here. It's a distinct difference, and it has roots that are based in fact. It's not just paranoia. So one can understand where it comes from. Having said all that, do you have a sense that the message is in fact getting out, and perhaps when these confrontations occur, the percentage of the message getting out to the percentage of people around the country is in fact increasing, because all this only serves to draw attention to what you're doing?
I think it's unquestionable that the out-of-hand police response to these demonstrations around the country is galvanizing support for the movement. And I also think it's compelling people to rethink how they consider police around the country. I mean, when you see riot officers showing up in Denver in full warrior gear to subdue a group of nonviolent demonstrators, when you see the mass arrests that have occurred here in New York City, when you see 30 arrested in front of the State House in Des Moines, Iowa, it has to bring to mind, are police officers out to safeguard order and ensure public safety, or are they being given political directives by superiors that may actually end up impeding the maintenance of public safety?
Yeah, and if the answer is in fact the first, why are they doing such a bad job of conveying that and making everything look like a photo op? Which leads to the last question, Ryan. My understanding is at least one of your friends in the organizing group behind Occupy Wall Street was approached about a one-on-one meeting with Mayor Bloomberg. Do you know anything about that?
As far as I know, that a few organizers or people who have been perceived as leaders have been approached about that. But like myself, we're all just individuals here. I can tell you why I'm down at Occupy Wall Street, but I have no authority to negotiate on behalf of the GA, nor does anybody else. And that's sort of part of the process. We have a very horizontal process, and it's pretty hard for some people to get their minds wrapped around that there's no hierarchy here. So that you can talk to us as individuals, and I'm sure those people have a lot to say, but as far as negotiating on behalf of the GA, it's just fruitless. It's null and void. There's no authority there.
Ryan Hoffman, who co-wrote an Occupy statement and who was good enough to update my movie references from the movies of 10 years ago to something a little bit more current, and freelance journalist Michael Tracey, both of whom were in this morning there, and in Michael's case, with something of the scars to prove it here. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming in. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, Keith.
And we had hoped to talk to the man who was run over, collided with, however we want to describe it, that police bike, Ari Douglas, except, of course, he's still in custody despite his injuries. His attorney, though, joins me. That's next. This is Countdown. The story of the one rollerball episode, the man and the police motorbike. His attorney joins us. She's also part of the legal team representing the whole protest and will tell us what's newest legally. An unlikely indicator that the protests have had some kind of impact, what the Treasury Secretary said today about regulating Wall Street. Tomorrow it all officially goes global. The rotten food being thrown is from Milano. Let me repeat myself. Special comment that first followed the infamous August debt deal, which bears repeating tonight. The only way to prevent turning this country entirely over to the corporations and the rich is to take to the streets. Ahead on Countdown. We continue with a special edition of Countdown following today's postponement of a confrontation between police and Occupy Wall Street at Zuccotti Park in New York, and the police violence that followed as demonstrators marched down Wall Street. The worst example of that we've seen was this. National Lawyers Guild legal observer Ari Douglas, in some fashion at minimum, hit by a police motor scooter, which was then left on his leg while he screamed in agony. Police spokesman Paul Brown, however, insists Douglas was not in fact run over by nor trapped under that scooter. Brown claiming, quote, independent witnesses said he purposely put his legs under the scooter and then claimed falsely he was trapped. A New York Daily News photographer, Joseph Marino, reportedly having said that while the scooter did indeed hit Mr. Douglas, quote, I saw him sticking his legs under the bike to make it appear he was run over. An Associated Press photographer has also reportedly claimed that Douglas put his feet under the scooter, which still doesn't explain the blood you saw on Mr. Douglas's face or on the street. Mr. Douglas has been hospitalized and arrested on charges including felony criminal mischief, obstructing judicial administration, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest. Yetta Kurland is Ari Douglas's attorney, also a member of the Liberty Park Working Group, which supports Occupy Wall Street legally. Thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
Have you had a chance to speak with your client?
I have not. I've been trying all day. He's been incarcerated for over 12 hours, and I have not been able to speak with him.
Do you have any idea the extent of his injuries?
I know that he was forced, he had to go to a hospital to get emergent services. He had lacerations on his face. You saw the photos. He was bloodied all over his face.
So the police theory on this is he threw himself onto the ground and then purposely stuck his feet under a moving motorcycle, or moped is probably a closer description, a moving vehicle. He purposely put his feet, one or both of them, under this thing in order to what?
That is a good question. Well, let's start with what we do know.
Yeah.
Ari Douglas was a National Lawyers Guild New York City chapter legal observer. He was standing with a number of other professional photographers and journalists. It's important to note he was not part of the protest. He was there in an official capacity to legally observe. He was run into by a motor vehicle, as you described, which unfortunately is one of the tactics NYPD uses to affect crowd control, and was clearly struck by the vehicle. And then instead of being attended to or the police officer helping him, it seems as I watched the various videos, the police officer backed onto Mr. Douglas, pinning him under the motor vehicle, and then, again, rather than helping him, dismounted that vehicle, walked away from it, and left him trapped under that vehicle. He was finally able to dislodge from the vehicle, at which point the police officers jumped on top of him and proceeded to injure him so seriously that he had to be rushed to an emergency room. That is not what police officers should be doing in that type of situation.
Apart from the idea that everybody's made so far in the show that it's probably a really bad idea to be using not just mounted police on horseback are dangerous enough. You put a horse into the equation. You put some sort of combustion engine into it, you're going to get combustion. Apart from that, if your client is going to be an attorney and he actually did what they're suggesting, wouldn't that have ramifications for his career?
Well, so let's accept the premise that a trained National Lawyers Guild legal observer found it prudent to, I guess, throw himself under a moving motor vehicle and then, I don't know, pretend to have injured himself, although that's not what I see when I look at the video footage. I see someone clearly in distress, and if you look and listen to the audio, you hear people around him also distressed over seeing him in distress. But let's assume, for argument purposes, that that's the case. That does not justify bloodying him and injuring him so severely that he requires emergency services. The police are supposed to be here to protect us, and I think it draws an interesting parallel to what our clients are fighting for at Zuccotti Park and Liberty Park for this kind of oversight and balance. And, you know, the NYPD is there to protect and serve the public in situations like getting run over by motor vehicles. That's when the police step in to protect you.
Or let's just step it one step back. Let's say he's there and he believes he's about to be run over by the vehicle. This is not a lightweight. He's not being hit by a bicycle here going 0 miles an hour. Even if he's just panicking and just bawling like a child there, some attention needs to be paid to him at some point. All right, well, we probably exhausted the absurdity of this. Let me ask you, you mentioned that you're part of this legal team representing the entire movement. How is this going to resolve? Because it would seem, the thing that seems to have gotten ignored in this entire equation is the announcement today was the cleaning has been postponed. It is not. There's not going to be a cleaning. Have a nice time. Merry Christmas. How is this going to be resolved? Is there going to be a negotiation, or how do you think this is going to turn out? Do you know?
That's a really good point. It's unfortunate that we're seeing such serious problems with excessive force in the NYPD, and that overshadowed. I think all of us watched that video over and over today, and I think we're all sitting here this evening saying, you know, I'm not sure that the police have learned their lesson post the Republican National Convention and post 9/11. In terms of handling protesters and dealing with public space. But I think that all unfortunately overshadowed the fact that there was a victory today. The police did not go into Zuccotti Park and shut it down, and that is a good thing, and we're delighted by that, but at the same time we're not out of the forest. We're not over that. And it's great that the Brookfield folks have put out a memorandum saying that they want to work with us, but we have heard nothing concretely in terms of any type of opportunities to sit down or to clearly negotiate. So that's something that we're looking for.
Is there any suspicion that what happened this morning was a ruse just to get witnesses out of the way, that the city will swing by at some point at 4 o'clock in the morning and say, oh, by the way, the owners have changed their mind again, get out?
Right. I mean, there were a number of tense moments. To say that it was a victory today is not to say that we didn't at different points worry that all sorts of things were going to happen. But I think that that's exactly right. I mean, it seemed very much that it was a pretext to basically shut down and stop folks from demonstrating and being in the space, constitutionally protected use of the space, and to be there. So, you know, and I think you played earlier Mayor Bloomberg's statement, which is basically saying, well, you know, we're going to negotiate, or if they don't negotiate, then basically we're just going to do the same thing. So, you know, it's great, again, that they've put out there that they want to do that, but now they need to come to the table. You know, we're attorneys. I'm just one of the attorneys representing these arrestees. We have a whole National Lawyers Guild here working around the clock to do this, and we need to hear from the folks at Brookfield to actually sit down and come up with some concrete solutions.
Otherwise, the next confrontation gets 1,000 times the publicity that this one did, which also would seem to be, at some point, going to occur to the police in the city of New York, although clearly it has not. Yetta Kurland, the attorney for the injured protester and one of the attorneys representing Occupy Wall Street. Great, thanks for coming in, and our best to your client.
Thank you.
The biggest of all the other questions tonight as we move from the events to the substance of the protest: has Occupy Wall Street had any practical effect on the regulation of Wall Street? The Treasury Secretary, of all people, hints at perhaps just that. Markos Moulitsas joins me next as our special edition of Countdown continues. In less than 1 month, Occupy Wall Street has gone from an obscure plan to a protest that polling shows at least 3/4 of all Americans know about and less than 1/4 have a negative opinion about. And now today comes the first tangible evidence, perhaps, that among that 77% is the Secretary of the Treasury. How Occupy Wall Street might have just spun off a movement inside the Obama administration that we might call Clean Up Wall Street. Markos Moulitsas joins me next on Countdown. Countdown is live weeknights here at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 Pacific. Our primary replays are at 11 p.m. Eastern, at 11 p.m. Pacific. We call it Our Little Miracle. In about 4 short weeks, the Occupy movement has tapped a deep well of discontent in this country and mobilized thousands coast to coast. Now, a few signs that it might also be changing the nation's political direction. In our third story tonight, the indications the Occupy movement could already be moving the political needle, if ever so slightly to the left. as some top members of the Obama administration say they hear the protesters' message and are considering tightening the rules on big banks. Treasury Secretary Geithner, who's long faced criticism for perceived sympathy to Wall Street, saying on CNBC today that he plans to deliver on the administration's promise of financial reform, claiming that, in fact, he already has.
You've seen very, very dramatic enforcement actions already by the enforcement authorities across the U.S. government, and I'm sure you're going to see more to come. You should stay tuned for that.
Meantime, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton echoing that message, telling a group of Manhattan business leaders today they are not off the hook, saying, quote, the protests ought to be a reminder to all of us that we have a great deal of work to do to live up to the expectations of the American people. This after several high-ranking congressional Democrats, including the former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, pledged their support for the protest. Still, that could be in the hopes of advancing their own causes, winning the upcoming elections, per se. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the House Democrats' fundraising arm, now circulating a petition asking supporters to join them and, quote, stand with the Occupy Wall Street protests. That was fast. Joining me now, Countdown contributor Markos Moulitsas, of course, the founder and publisher of Daily Kos. Markos, good evening.
Good evening. Happy Friday.
And to you, sir. What do you make of the Geithner comments about expecting regulation? I mean, didn't he sort of undercut himself when he said he'd already put harsh regulations in place, apparently the invisible kind that nobody knows about?
Yeah, I'm actually happy that they're being forced to talk about this. It's much easier to ignore and hope that this goes away. And I think they're realizing it's not going away, so they have to hit it head on. And I'm happy that he says, stay tuned, things are going to happen. But when he says dramatic things have already happened, I mean, you know what? His definition of dramatic clearly is a lot different than mine, because I haven't seen anything that would even remotely come close to being called dramatic. So if we're going to get more of the same, then I'm not that excited. But if he's just trying to hint that there actually will be real action ahead of us, then that's a positive. I'm just not holding my breath right now.
And the Secretary of State's quote that the protests ought to be a reminder to all of us that we have, note the us and the we, have a great deal of work to do to live up to the expectations of the American people. That seems like it's slightly above kind of boilerplate. Translate that to who's the we? Who's this we, Kemosabe? Is she referring to herself and Wall Street, or just Wall Street, or who?
Well, that actually is a lot more encouraging, I have to say.
Okay.
When we talk about we, I mean, it's funny to me for a movement that's been criticized as not having demand. What does it stand for? People know what it stands for. I mean, there's no doubt what it stands for. I mean, and Hillary doesn't need to see a list of demands to know what this is all about. And those business leaders she was talking to don't need a list of demands to know what Hillary Clinton is talking about. They all know exactly what this is all about. And the fact is that they're going to have to pay more attention to it. And if nothing else, this is what this movement has really been all about.
What about the fundraiser from the petition from the DCCC? I mean, is that a little disingenuous, or is there a silver lining in that, or how do you read that one?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is they're trying to maybe co-opt the movement. That's a little crass and a little unseemly. On the other hand, they're kind of tying themselves to this movement. Yeah. So it gets a lot harder for themselves to try to carry Wall Street's water after they've sat there and said, we're in solidarity with Occupy Wall Street. Not that they won't try, don't get me wrong. Right. The crassness is not outside of the realm of politics. But, you know, in the past what would happen is that they would run away from those dirty hippies, right? Oh, hippies, go away. The fact that they're not, the fact that they're trying to find ways to use this to their advantage actually is a long-term good.
Having looked at this landscape, obviously politicians do not have to believe in something or even like it to advocate it or to get it done. I mean, it's nice when they do that. It's kind of sweet in an old-fashioned what they're supposed to be there for way. But being scared of it is sufficient, and it really can change. But we're not Great Britain. But last spring, if you had told everybody that by fall there'd be 83 different investigations of Rupert Murdoch, that the tide had turned from a Rupert Murdoch teat-sucking community into a let's see if we can put him in jail community in a matter of 3 months, nobody would have believed you. Could it possibly move that dramatically in this country on something of far more substance than whether or not Rupert Murdoch is, you know, a bad guy and a bad influence on society?
Heck, if 3 months ago you had asked me or had told me that there would be this mass movement that was fixated on substance, not nonsense, right? Not the usual media crap, but actually substantive movement that was focused on income inequality and the excesses of Wall Street, and that it was starting to get attention from politicians, I probably would have laughed. I would have said, that's really optimistic and cute, but really, that doesn't happen in this America. Well, it's happening, and that's what's so excited about this, is that this is actually truly a movement based on substance, based on something more than death panels or, you know, notions of Obama wants to take away my guns and freedom. And this is actually based on empirical evidence that shows that the American people are not getting ahead except for that really tiny 1%. And to me, what's amazing about this is that Americans are getting the message, they're embracing it, and you even have people in that 1%. I mean, there's this great site, we are the 1% stand with you. I forget the exact URL. Yeah. But basically, it's people who are saying, yeah, no, we're one of those lucky 1%, and, you know, this isn't fair. This is not what America is all about, and we stand with you. We stand with that 99%.
We'll see. Countdown contributor and the founder and publisher of Daily Kos, Markos Moulitsas, great thanks. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you very much.
Tomorrow, Occupy and all the related protest groups plan to act in unison around the world. The potential there with activist and comedian Jamie Kilstein. Next. When Occupy Wall Street protesters are physically confronted by police, the demonstrators often chant the whole world is watching. But on our number 2 story in the countdown tonight, we might be entering a new phase in which the whole world's participating against the concentrated power of the economic elite. A movement called United for Global Change at the website 15october.net is promising demonstrations tomorrow in 951 cities in 82 countries. They are primarily in North America, Europe, and South America, but protesters in Milan, Italy got a head start today by marching, chanting, throwing fruit, and storming the offices of Goldman Sachs. Yeah, let's see you do that against Bloomberg. Our cousins have much to teach us. Beyond Italy, the United for Global Change website features posters in many languages. According to the New York Times, protesters in London hope to occupy the stock exchange. Our cousins there have many things to teach us. In France, they want to march from the stock exchange to the central city square. Meanwhile, back here in New York, an Occupy event planned for Times Square at 5 p.m. Its promotional poster designed by Shepard Fairey, who was behind Barack Obama's Hope graphic during the 2008 campaign. That's how quickly things change. Let's bring in Jamie Kilstein, the activist, comedian, co-host of Citizen Radio, who's visited Zuccotti Park several times while covering these protests. Good to see you, sir.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for doing all this coverage.
Of course. It's news, and theoretically, we're supposed to be covering the news.
I hear that,
yeah.
And then when I turn to other stations, I forget that.
I know. It's Zolindra was the news, apparently, today. I missed it. Is it more correct, as we look at this worldwide phenomenon, to say that Occupy Wall Street is actually the American version of the European protests?
I definitely think they have a lot of similar grievances when it comes to austerity. We'll know for sure if in 5 years, you know, Brooklyn hipsters are saying, oh, I like the European protests a lot more. Yeah. But I'm just excited that for the first time in so long, the entire world has solidarity with America. Mm-hmm. I mean, I remember during all of George Bush's administration, I'd go to perform overseas, and people would be like, where are you from? And I'm like, America, or Canada, or whatever. And now, you go over there, and they're proud. You hear people in Egypt who have gone through, you know, so much. Cite us as inspiration. That absolutely blows my mind.
Yeah, we have a good track record, just not recently, so they have something to go. But to watch those tapes, that's like a new group in Milan that's just showing solidarity with you. And they have pink smoke flares, and they have paint to throw on the walls, and they're throwing fruits and vegetables at the buses. And I'm not saying we need to have that here, because part of the bar that's being raised for Occupy both Wall Street and everywhere else in the country is to be nonviolent, even if nonviolent means don't be violent against fruits and vegetables.
Right.
But there's still something, I don't know, refreshing, at least to watch this and kind of like, there you go. Those are people out there hanging their backsides off the end of the pier and waiting to see what happens.
Right, absolutely. But I think you had something, you had a nonviolent version of that this morning. You know, you do watch that and you get so excited because it's everything you're feeling inside, and they're doing it. And now I know not to mess with Milan ever, right? But
seriously, drive some motorbikes into us, will you?
Yeah,
ciao.
No, bye.
Yes, right.
But what's so exciting about this morning is, you know, things like this have happened before. Yeah. Not to this level, but they haven't been covered by the corporate media, right? And you even see how the corporate media treated Occupy Wall Street. You know, the first day, my wife, who writes for The Nation, Allison Kilkenny, a couple other journalists, and, you know, you started doing it, and that was it. CNN mocked them, right? CNN said that they were a bunch of bongo-playing hippies. If that's the case, that means what happened this morning is a bunch of pot-smoking, bongo-playing hippies defeated a billionaire mayor and the entire NYPD. That's incredibly exciting and just as moving as that clip you played from Milan.
Yep. What do we know about Occupy Times Square? Where are we going to occupy?
I don't know where we're going to occupy. I'm showing up. I mean,
because first off, it's going to be too crowded with the tourists to really get anything done, isn't it?
That's what's going to be so interesting because, you know, my wife and I, we went down to the day Occupy Wall Street had all the unions come together. We went down, and that was the first time I saw Occupy Wall Street really collide with everyday people. And I didn't see what I thought I would see. I didn't see bankers heckling us. What I saw was people on tourist buses raising their fists.
Right.
I saw shop owners outside nodding, giving the peace symbol. And now we're going to just the middle of it. We're going to absolutely, you know, the biggest place that you can't ignore. You can't. Aaron Burnett can't ignore it. All those people, they can't ignore it anymore. And I think
Aaron Burnett.
Sorry. Can I forget?
I know.
Part of it was timing. Where when I saw the commercial on CNN and it was like straight from Wall Street, I was like, CNN, are you looking outside? Do you know what's happening?
Do you know what's even worse? Have you noticed how many times I was only down there once? The largest visible ad from Zagati Park is an ad for her show.
Straight
it's
up
like,
there.
boy, just blew that money right there. That's not going over well.
Money.
Yeah. The people in Wall Street, the ones in Times Square tomorrow, may be just saying, oh, these are the noisiest mimes we've ever seen.
Yeah, exactly. Where's the naked cowboy? I'm confused.
Yeah. Final end result of this, a statue for Mike Bloomberg as the unsung, unexpected, and certainly undesirable or undesired hero of this.
I think if you're going to pay tribute to Michael Bloomberg, if you're going to build a statue for him, as long as it takes over where all the offices that have pillaged our country on Wall Street are, I will happily help pay for that monument.
I'm glad you do. You're willing to do that because I think it ought to be like probably 3 or 4 stories tall. It's like, this is the man who just kept doing the wrong thing and publicizing this thing. They almost got away with a nice kumbaya moment this morning, didn't they?
I know. And
it was like, okay, no, you're right. We're being too tough, and let's just go on, have a nice time. Protest your little hearts out in the rain.
When they followed him to dinner last night and started protesting, I was like, all right, man, like, your move.
Yeah, well, and now he's going to have to do, again, he has to do that same move again.
You're not going to be able to kick him out.
Right.
I mean, you're not at this point. There's so much support. You're not going to be able to do it.
And the attention will quadruple.
Yep.
And they might even get Aaron Burnett down there, although.
That would be amazing.
With a Sherpa guide and like a couple of St. Bernards to help her out. Yeah. Otherwise she'll
just a tie-dye shirt. It's Aaron Burnett's hippie hours. Like,
I don't know what happened. Nice woman. I don't know what happened. Nice woman, good journalist. I don't know what happened.
It's the business.
Activist and comedian Jamie Kilstein. Great, thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Special comment that was written and aired for one purpose now has a new meaning and a new context. It's next. This is Countdown. Finally tonight, I've been in many places asked for a special comment on Occupy Wall Street. I may do one again. I did one already, only I didn't know it at the time, much to my joy. Others had already thought what I had thought, but they had planned what I had only advocated. Thus, our number one story, my special comment on Occupy on October 14th would be virtually the same as the one I made in the wake of the ludicrous debt deal on August 1st. So rather than rephrase myself, let me repeat myself with a few edits for time. Our government has now given up the concept of right and wrong. We have in this deal declared that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all political incumbents are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are renomination, re-election, and the pursuit of hypocrisy. We have in this deal gone from the 4 freedoms to the 4 great hypocrisies. We have superseded Congress to facilitate $750 billion in domestic cuts, including Medicare, in order to end an artificially induced political hostage crisis over debt originating from the bills run up by a Republican president who funneled billions of taxpayer dollars to the military-industrial complex by unfunded, unnecessary, and unproductive wars, enabled in doing so by the very same Republican leaders who now cry for balanced budgets, and we have called it compromise. And those who defend it have called it a credit to a pragmatic president who wins some sort of political points, because having stood for almost nothing here, he gave away almost nothing for which he stood. It would be comical if it were not tragic. Either way, it is a signal moment in our history in which both parties have agreed and codified that the political structure of this nation shall now be based entirely on hypocrisy and political self-perpetuation. And of what value would this mandated balanced budget be? Our own history proves that at a time of economic crisis, if the businesses aren't spending and the consumers aren't spending, the government must spend. Our ancestors were the lab rats in the horrible experiments of the Hoover administration that brought on the Great Depression, in which the government curled up into a ball while it simultaneously insisted the economy should heal itself, when, in times of crisis, then and now, the economy turns out to be comprised entirely of a bunch of rich people who will sit on their money no matter if the country starves. The fourth of the great hypocrisies is the evident agreement to not add any revenues to the process of cutting. Not only is the impetus to make human budget sacrifices out of the poor and dependent formalized, but the rich and the corporations are thus indemnified again and given more money not merely to spend on themselves and their own luxuries, but more vitally, they are given more money to spend on buying politicians, buying legislatures, buying courts, buying entire states, all of which can be directed like so many weapons in the service of one cause and one cause alone, making by statute and ruling the further protection of the wealthy at the expense of everybody else, untouchable, inviolable, permanent. The White House today boasted of loopholes to be closed and tax breaks to be rescinded later by a committee that is yet to be formed. There are no new taxes except the stealth ones enacted on 99 out of 100 Americans by this evil transaction. Every dollar cut from the safety net is another dollar added to the citizen's cost for education, for security, for health, for life itself. It is another dollar he can't spend on making a better life for himself, or at least his children. It is another dollar he must spend instead on simply keeping himself alive. Where is the outrage over these great hypocrisies? Do you expect it to come from a corrupt and corrupted media for whom access is of greater importance than criticizing the failure of a political party or defending those who don't buy newspapers or can't leap website paywalls or could not afford cable TV? Do you expect it to come from a cynical and manipulative political structure? Do you expect it from those elected officials who no longer know anything of government or governance, but only perceive how to get elected or how to pose in front of a camera and pretend to be leaders? Do you expect it from politicians themselves who will merely calculate whether or not it's right based on whether or not it will get them more contributions? Do you expect it will come from the great middle ground of this country, with a population obsessed with entertainment, video games, social media, sports, and trivia? Where is the outrage to come from? From you. It will do no good to wait for the politicians to suddenly atone for their sins. They're too busy trying to keep their jobs to do their jobs. It will do no good to wait for the media to suddenly remember its origins as the free press, the watchdog of democracy envisioned by Jefferson. They are too busy trying to get exclusive details about exactly how the bank robbers emptied the public's pockets to give a damn about telling anybody what they looked like or which way they went. It will do no good to wait for the apolitical public to get a clue. They can't hear the clue through all the chatter and scandal and diversion and delusion and illusion. The betrayal of what this nation is supposed to be about did not begin with this deal, and it surely will not end with this deal. There is a tide pushing back the rights of each of us, and it has been artificially induced by union bashing and the sowing of hatreds and fears, and now this ever more institutionalized economic battering of the average American. It will continue, and it will crush us, because those who created it are organized and unified and hell-bent. And the only response is to be organized and unified and hell-bent in return. We must find again the energy and the purpose of the 1960s and early 1970s, and we must protest this deal and all the goddamn deals to come in the streets. We must arise non-violently but insistently. General strikes, boycotts, protests, sit-ins, non-cooperation, takeovers. But modern versions of that resistance, facilitated and amplified by a weapon our predecessors did not have, the glory that is instantaneous communication. It is from an old and almost cliched motion picture that the wisdom comes. First, you've got to get mad. I cannot say to you, meet here or there at this hour or that one, and we'll peacefully break the back of government that now exists merely to get its functionaries reelected. But I can say that the time is coming when the window for us to restore the control of our government to ourselves will close, and we had damn well better act before then. Because this deal is more than a tipping point in which the government goes from defending the safety net to gutting it. This is wrong. And while our government has now declared that it has given up the concept of right and wrong, you and I have not and will not do so. Good night and good luck.